Hey everyone, got another motherboard review here for you from MSI. This was actually one of the chipsets intended for AMD Ryzen's latest generation of CPUs. And this was going to be the B650 Edge motherboard right over here. And looking forward to actually getting my hands on this board. This one actually really does have quite a little bit of weight to it. And a lot of features this board actually has. Let's see how it compares with the X670 chipset as well. What kind of differences it might actually have. So let's go ahead and pop this open, do a full unboxing. Quick overview of the motherboard itself, a whole build installation, and of course your BIOS overview. So let's get started. Here we have the box with the full name of the motherboard, chipset down here, AMD Ryzen, some of the little details here, and of course that cute little dragon up there as well too. Box definitely does have some weight to it. I have received a couple of questions regarding MSI motherboards. Just also wanted to let you know that this box here has no little like sticker or label on it. It's perfectly normal for the box to come like this. But obviously when you're picking this up, be sure to go ahead and check all the contents of your motherboard just to make sure little things aren't missing. It does actually list some little things back here that should be included, as well as other details here of the motherboard itself. So you can actually see a good full picture of here, all the little details down here, chipset again. I always find this very useful, so you can actually see how many USB ports and other connections you actually have on the back. 2.5 gigabyte LAN, again, something becoming very standard these days on all these motherboards. And other little details as well too. Obviously very important, this supports DDR5 memory. Unlike the Intel chipsets for 12th and 13th generation Intel CPUs that has like the DDR4 variant, AMD generation 4 Ryzen here is only sticking to DDR5, which actually might be a little easier to avoid confusion. And the good news is DDR5 prices are actually coming down to a degree. DDR4 obviously a lot cheaper, but still, you know, something to keep in mind. And there is going to be no user manual, I'm guessing, included in this box here, considering I do see a little QR code down here to actually go ahead and scan. So let's go ahead and open this up and take a look at what's inside. First things first, obviously, we do see our motherboard here. I'm gonna go ahead and take that out. It does stick to the same box within the box feature here. Oh, as I said, that motherboard definitely has some weight to it. And not a lot of little accessories here. As you said, most of the documents are actually basically included on that QR code, little quick installation guide, EU regulatory notices, some little cable stickers here, fan stickers as well, some little dragon stickers. Those actually look really cute for what it's worth. Your Wi-Fi Bluetooth antenna. Keep in mind, even if you're planning not to use Wi-Fi, in my case here, I'm actually going to not be using it for the most part. If you're not planning to use Wi-Fi, you do have to connect these in order to have the Bluetooth working, so just something to keep in mind. And looks like 2 SATA cables as well, and a couple of little M2, M3 screws for your NVMe drives, which I'll actually be using on this motherboard. All that aside, let's go ahead and take a look at the board itself. I always try to be really careful removing these just because I actually like to reuse these bags, and these stickers are actually, well, this one's actually coming out really easily. Other ones I've actually removed have basically kind of stretched the bag out. This one got a little stretch, but no big deal, it's still usable again. And the bag sometimes tears, especially the older motherboards. And there is our board right there. Immediately you can actually tell this motherboard has a built-in I/O backplate shield, so obviously no concern about worrying about forgetting to put the plate here when you install your motherboard in your case. Looking over some ports here, we have HDMI and display ports here. This is actually if your Ryzen CPU does have integrated graphics, which a number of the 4th generation Ryzen CPUs actually have. You do have, as I mentioned earlier, 2.5G gigabit LAN right over here. And it looks like we actually have a couple of USB ports, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 USB ports, and 1 USB-C. Very, very useful. I believe the X670 chipset variant actually has 2 USB-Cs, but one over here. And as I'll go over in a little bit, you actually do have another one on the motherboard so you can connect your front panel. Right over here, we actually have a couple of your Wi-Fi connections. Basically, as I mentioned, if you want to go ahead and use Bluetooth but not use Wi-Fi, you'll still have to go ahead and connect those 2 antennas or any compatible antennas back here. And a little bit further to the right, we do have our audio connections, including the optical out, and basically all the other audio connections as well here, including microphone, and basically your left and right channel stereo speaker right here in the little red connection. Usually traditionally used to be green, now it's pretty much a red connection over here. Starting from the bottom left, we do have the front panel audio connection, basically to connect front panel connections for headphone and microphone as well too. A little 4-pin RGB as well. Some other connections there as well too. The manual actually online, I took a look at it, and it doesn't fully describe all the connections, but I'll definitely try to get down to the bottom as many as I could. A little LED switch down there. Looks like another connection. I believe that's basically having to do with, I believe, a chassis intrusion. So just correct me if I'm wrong, if that's actually not the connection right there. A little bit more further to the right, it looks like we have those very important fan connections, both of them 4-pin, actually it looks like right over here. And looks like there's 2 of them on the bottom there. A little bit further to the right, we do have a pair of USB 2.0 connections. You can actually see one right there, just in the middle to the left and the right of that little capacitor. And further to the right, we have 2 SATA ports hiding right over there. There's actually a total of 6 SATA ports, and I'll go ahead and show you the other SATA ports as well too. Further to the right on the corner are those old traditional front panel connections, basically your hard drive, LED light, power LED, and power switch button, reset button, and other connections as well too. There is also the 4-pin PC speaker connection if you're actually interested in using one of those as well too. Just above the front panel connections, we actually have another system fan connection, another 4-pin fan connection right there. To the right, we do have a USB 3 front panel connection, very useful if you have some USB 3 ports on the front, along with 4 additional SATA ports right over there. So you definitely do have that option there as well to connect drives, even though most of us are now using NVMe drives. A little further to the right, we have a USB Type-C connection. Very important connection right there, becoming much more popular. And I believe the chipset X670 chipset actually may come with 2 of these. You can actually see this little space over here. It almost looks like something's missing. So I'm guessing there possibly could have had the option to actually put another one there, but maybe for the higher tier motherboards. So who knows? Right over here, we do have a 24-pin, the traditional 24-pin PSU connection. And that pretty much hasn't changed over the years. It has been 1.20 pin, but now it's a total of 24 pin. So very, very standard connection. I'm not sure if that will actually really change anytime too soon. Motherboards really don't use too much more power. It's really the CPUs and the GPUs that actually really do that. And just above there, not to be missed, is the 4 DIMM slots for DDR5. You can actually see them right here. And since I'll be using 2 DIMM slots here, for dual channel, I'm going to go ahead and just open these right over there. Made a little bit of bounce there on the camera, sorry about that. I'll be using these 2 for proper dual channel use for 2 chips. Taking a look at the top over here, we actually have an additional 4-pin RGB LED connection right up here, as well as an additional 1, 2, and 3 4-pin fan connections. One of them appeared to be another system fan. Another one is the CPU cooler fan, and one of them is actually a pump connection right there if you're going to be using water cooling. So be sure to actually go ahead and get that connected there if you'll be using water cooling for proper monitoring right over there. Over here we actually do have a little bit further to the right, we have this pretty big, pretty tough looking heatsink right over here. which is actually semi-connected to the basic big heatsink that's covering the I/O shield and everything. So very, very tough there. Pretty much was really adding a lot of weight to this particular motherboard. Not the only factor, but you can actually see just how solid this pretty much is. And right over here, not to be missed, are two 8-pin CPU power connections. For basically, I've had this question a number of times already in a couple of motherboard reviews. You'll most of the time just be needing to use one of these. But if you actually feel inclined to actually connect both of them, go right ahead. It's not like you'll fry your motherboard, giving it too much power, but you really only need to actually connect one 8-pin connection here, particularly if your CPU is using 65 watt, which I do plan to use on this motherboard, 95, 105, 125. Anything maybe over 125, I probably might recommend connecting these. This is really more for just overclocking, and people basically just want to go ahead and really push their CPU to the limit. So just something to keep in mind right there, if in case you're wondering. Getting a higher view here of the motherboard itself, you can actually see this PCI NVMe connection right over here. This is where your NVMe M2 drive will actually be installed for ideal performance if you're planning to go ahead and use one. I am planning to actually go ahead and put one here. I may actually go ahead and put one down here as well too, just to actually go ahead and potentially clone or copy over some data temporarily. And speaking of which, right down here, we actually have two M2 NVMe connections just below. This is a long looking heatsink here, but once it's removed, you'll actually see there's one over here and one over here as well too. Additionally, you do have your main PCI Express slot right over here. So if you're going to be using a video card, obviously you are, unless you're using integrated graphics. A dedicated video card will go in ideally into this slot right here. You do have additional slot right over here for another video card, and also an PCI Express X1 slot down here on the bottom. This motherboard looks absolutely amazing. Just first view over here. I'm going to go ahead and take this off once it's installed. I do promise. I know some previous motherboard videos actually leave these little stickers on in case something actually goes wrong. So let's not go ahead and jinx things. I'll definitely go ahead and remove this. Let's get this board with a CPU, some memory, a heatsink, and get things up and running. I'll give you a quick little overview of the BIOS and other little things as well too. So let's get to it. All right, that was pretty comical there. If you actually just saw, it literally just popped right off the table. So just something to keep in mind, that thing will actually shoot up. So maybe have your hand over, ready to catch it. Those little clicky sounds are always good to hear. I want to actually mention one little detail here. You can actually see the USB 3 connector that comes out through this little access hole right over here and can connect. But turning the cable a little bit is actually a little difficult. So I'm actually going to sneak it behind this little panel here, which actually comes out, can be removed completely. This is actually intended for to put a drive bay basically. And you can actually see there's a little bit of a hole here, so I can actually connect the cable a little bit more easier in this section right down here, and then just push the panel back, which will actually pretty much be equivalent and level with these others. So just little small details, I guess you can say, make a big difference. This computer is up and computer is actually up and running. The first initial post time actually didn't really take that long. You can actually see the system pretty much went through all the little checksums and everything, memory, video card, CPU, and immediately saw display, I would say after about 25-30 seconds, which is actually not so bad. Sometimes I've actually even seen these things take up to a minute, which is normal. And you know, it is what it is. Your initial boot time, picking up all the CPU and everything, and showing all that information into the memory. You might actually notice here that the BIOS build date is fairly recent, from late April. And you may not know that fairly recently there was a little hiccup with the BIOS and some voltage settings that the AMD processors actually are using, which can cause a little bit of a hazard there in certain processors. So they went ahead and addressed this, and many manufacturers actually address this as well in BIOS updates. So I went ahead and just installed that just for safety reasons, and also just might as well just go ahead and get the latest BIOS up in here as well too. Additionally, during the build, you might have noticed that I actually did use a stock cooler that did come with this particular CPU, the 7700 8-core processor. I'm actually planning to get myself probably another Be Quiet dark rock cooler, and I'll go ahead and install that just for better performance. You can actually see the CPU temperatures around 52 degrees Celsius just sitting here idly in the BIOS. I actually prefer that to be at least 5 or 10 degrees cooler if possible. So an aftermarket cooler will definitely do the trick here to some degree. I do have the memory at the ideal 6,000 megahertz right over there. And looks like we're all set here. So I'll basically go ahead and do a little bit of a walkthrough through the BIOS here. Very familiar BIOS if you're familiar with MSI motherboards. Here right now we're actually in an easy mode setting. Over here you can actually toggle between easy mode and advanced using the F7 key or just clicking this little button up here. Some basic information you can immediately see. Some CPU motherboard temperatures, V-core voltage, your current BIOS mode, right now it's on UEFI. The full motherboard name, the processor you're using, memory size, which is 32 gigabytes, your BIOS version, and BIOS build. As I mentioned, I just went ahead and updated this to the latest version available. Current CPU speed, DDR5 speed, and your boot priority over here. You can actually move these around, just flip them around over here to actually go ahead and have one drive or another be your priority boot, and then the secondary and third and so forth as it goes down the list. Just below here on the left, you can actually see all the options. Right now we're currently in CPU, so you can actually see some further details such as the base clock, the ratio, multiplier, and other little details here. Again, frequency 3.8 gigahertz, running at stock. Go ahead and click here, you can actually see some more details. The memory, running at 6 gigahertz right over here. You can actually see the two DIMM slots that are currently in use by both the two G-Skill chips that I installed, and the other two DIMM slots are currently empty. Down here it looks like it does have an Expo profile, very similar to XMP, that AMD XX has addressed for this particular memory chip. So I just went ahead and set it manually to 6 gigahertz, but feel free to go ahead and turn this on if you'd like. It's very ideal, I guess, for timings and other settings as well too, specifically for these memory chips. Under storage, you immediately see all the SATA drives and all the M2 drives as well too. As seen earlier during the build process, I did actually go ahead and install a Samsung 980 Pro, so you can actually go ahead and see that 1 terabyte drive. And I go ahead and install my operating system on this. I do plan to connect a mechanical hard drive here in the SATA port, just use as a secondary for just storage, not particularly operating system or anything else related. Under fan speed, we actually do have a little bit of a control here. You can actually see here all the system fans that I have installed, I believe on number 3, 4, and 5. Actually, it looks like 4, 5, and 6, if I'm correct. And basically your CPU temperature curve right over here. There's actually another section in the motherboard that will give you better manipulation over this, but you do have these options over here, basically just a reference for the most part. And then here, just a little bit of a help option. You can go ahead and hit in a hotkey here, just to go ahead and jump into a particular setting or just save and whatnot. Very interesting setting here, screenshot. You actually do have that option up here, F12. If you do have a thumb drive plugged in, you can go ahead and hit F12 and just collect the screenshot that you currently want to just save here, and it'll just basically save onto your thumb drive. Below here on the left, we have the option for M-Flash, which I actually just used prior to making this video right over here, and just updating the BIOS. Once you click here, it'll immediately ask you if you want to go ahead and reboot and enter the flash tool, and that's basically where you go ahead and plug in your thumb drive and have your motherboard flash to the latest BIOS version. Under favorites, we can immediately assign hotkeys for particular settings and locations in the BIOS if there's one in particular that you use quite often. Very useful if you want to actually do that. And one of my favorites is a hardware monitor, where you can actually go ahead and manipulate the CPU fan speed versus temperature right over here. You can actually see the current CPU spin fan right over here, as well as the other fans connected to the system. Basically, these are my 3 front fans, if you actually noticed on this particular case. A little interesting note here, I don't see the rear fan, but it is actually on, so I'll probably have to look into that. The rear fan on this computer is actually connected to the controller, so that might actually be a reason why it's not showing up here, but I'll look into that in a little bit. Small details, as always. If you want to go ahead and manipulate a fan speed right here, so let's say system fan number 1 running at approximately 800 RPM. I'll go ahead and bring this up right over here, and you'll immediately see the fan speed starts to increase quite a bit, and of course get noisier. So just want to keep that in mind. You know, obviously you increase these and they'll immediately start getting a little bit louder. So you do have also the option for smart fan, basically matching or adjusting fan speeds according to the system temperature. On the right, looks like we have a couple of little toggle buttons over here, such as your onboard sound card, FTPM, basically the boot mode right over here. Basically your SATA configuration, and also to turn on and off the LED control down here. So pretty basic, straightforward options here, some decent manipulation. You also do have the option to click on this for CPU boost, or also engage in the XPO profiles on these memory chips. In this case, there's only one, so you actually only see only one here. Looks like you actually do have the option to even save a custom one in this particular button here. So another little option you might actually have. So let's go ahead and jump over into the advanced mode. Take a quick look there. You immediately see that the top portion here actually remains the same. All the options are the same here. Another little thing up here, you do have the option to search for basically a setting here in the BIOS, very useful, and also change the language up here as well too. All right, looking beyond these options up here that we saw earlier, under settings, we actually do have more thorough details here. Looks pretty simple, but once we go ahead and click on each option, particularly advanced, you'll see some different options here. We have to manipulate many settings here. Under this particular setting here, looks like we have a quick overview of all the drives, system time and date, and some other options down here, basically giving you some information about just memory and stuff very similar that we saw earlier. Moving on here, I can go ahead and click on Advanced, and you'll actually see some other more useful options here. One option I do like to go ahead is integrated peripherals right over here. We can actually go ahead and enable or disable certain things, such as the onboard sound card, and even disable the Wi-Fi module as well too. As I mentioned, this motherboard does have Wi-Fi Bluetooth. If you actually turn this off, you can still take advantage of the Bluetooth option as well too, as long as you have those antennas plugged in the back. Some other options here as well too, you can see related to SATA configuration. And many other options here. Here's the option for boot mode, so to speak, USB configuration, integrated graphics. You can go ahead and choose whether to use the dedicated graphic card on your computer or the integrated graphic on the CPU, if you actually do have one that supports it. Power management setup, some other options here. Secure erase, which basically has to do with your M2 drive, so I'm not going to engage that for the time being, considering there's nothing actually on my drive. Ask Media SATA, another little option there, as well as AMD overclocking. So I'm going to go over some overclocking options, but just bear in mind that overclocking, if you're not really familiar with what you're doing here, you may not want to engage many settings here, because you could potentially damage some of your hardware, particularly your CPU and memory, ultimately even your motherboard as well too. Moving on the list here, we have boot. Go ahead and very similar option to as I mentioned earlier up here, where you can actually go ahead and manipulate your boot options, even go ahead and disable some boot options, as you can see here. Just disabling all these, and I'll probably just leave basically the main hard drive up here. I'll probably also leave a USB thumb drive as well too. You can actually see there is still my USB thumb drive that I use to update the BIOS, so I'm just going to go ahead and leave that there. Some further options here as well. If you have multiple hard drives, you can actually go ahead and choose which one will be your primary. Very likely it's going to pick up the Windows, if you're actually using Windows on this, the Windows partition, and you should be all set there. On the security, you have a couple of options here, though not too many. But one particular option that's quite important is trusted computing. That has to do with the TPM. Very important if you're installing Windows 11. And some other options here as well too. Save and exit. Once you're done, go ahead and click here. It'll prompt you if you want to save your settings and reboot the system. I'm not going to engage that at this time. Let's move on to OC, basically for overclocking. We do have some options here. As I said earlier, if you're not really familiar with all this, you may not want to actually engage anything unless it's like a basic change, such as DRAM frequency right over here, which I've actually manually changed to 6 gigahertz since I know these memory chips are for that particular speed. Another little option that I do like to change here, just for show and tell, basically for a review. I went in here and went under CPU, advanced CPU configuration, and went under AMD CPS, and went ahead and disabled the core performance boost, basically what allows the CPU to go beyond its rated level. So CPU speed usually at 3.8 gigahertz base, and I basically turn that option on, so it won't go beyond that speed, like to 4.3 or even 5 gigahertz, making the temperature go up. I'm actually want to go ahead and test out to see how this, how much I can push the CPU without it getting too hot. Again, I'll probably reactivate this option when I have an aftermarket cooler that can really handle that much better. Seeing the CPU temperature spike to 70 or 75, just doing small things potentially, is just a little mind-boggling there, and I'd rather avoid that. So I just disable that for the time being. Some of the options here you can see involving the memory. The Expo option currently disabled since I manually changed it to 6 gigahertz, as you can see. And other options that I've not engaged here, such as voltage and other options here. So again, you may not want to engage these if you do not know what you're doing. Moving down to the last button on the left, basically your M Flash button. As I mentioned, this is the same function as it was in the easy mode. It will go ahead and prompt you if you're ready to jump into the M Flash tool, and to go ahead and update your BIOS. I'm not going to go ahead and engage that right now because it'll just reboot the entire system. On the right, we have a couple little buttons here. Hardware monitor, same thing obviously as in easy mode, as I mentioned earlier. You see all your fan speeds here and whatnot, the temperature versus fan speed curves as well too. OC profile, you can actually, if you actually do engage overclocking and want to actually preserve some settings, and even have some other ones immediately just use on the fly, this will be the option for you. We can go ahead and save your overclocking profiles and just load them here. You also do have the option to save them to USB and transfer them from one computer to another if you so wish. So basically, if you're going to go ahead and update a BIOS, flash your BIOS here, settings might be lost, so you might want to just save them on the USB, so you can just immediately just put them right back onto the same motherboard. So this is actually a useful tool for that. And under here, beta runner, with a couple of little options here. If you actually want to go ahead and engage these, I've actually not used these myself. You actually do see here, there's a tool here to just test the NVMe drive, which actually is available since I do have one installed. I'm actually going to not really engage this for the time being, but you do have some options here. I'm guessing if another BIOS update comes out, maybe some further options might actually appear here and be available for your computer. And that is pretty much it. A quick overview of the BIOS in easy mode and advanced. Definitely let me know if you got any little questions on this, or if there's anything you believe I missed. Again, just a quick overview here. I'm not going to immediately jump into certain voltage settings for your CPU. Everything is obviously a little different depending which processor and motherboard you're using. You can probably tell I actually did go ahead and change the video card. So not that anything was wrong with the other video card. Obviously I was using it during the entire BIOS demonstration, but I did actually go ahead and change it. This is going to be the video card I'm permanently using, which is a 3060 Ti gigabyte card right over here. You can actually see the logo appearing here. And speaking of LED logos and whatnot, on this particular board you can actually see that the little dragon, MSI dragon, kind of lights up right over there. Other than that, I don't think I really see any other LEDs on this particular motherboard around here, which is fine considering the fact that some people may not want it to be too flashy in the end, but you do have a lot of RGB LED connections here to actually go ahead and light up your computer case. I mean, you'll probably be getting lights from your video card, and this stock cooler has a lot of lights here already, so you can see the whole rainbow spectrum going through here during the entire thing, including the memory chips. So you can actually hear that everything's actually pretty quiet here. 3 fans in the front, 1 fan in the rear, CPU fan, and of course there's like 2 or 3 fans on that video card, and everything's still pretty quiet right now. Running pretty well, and I'm actually really impressed with this build so far. I'm looking forward to really throwing a lot of things at it, and let's see how it definitely performs. Hope everyone enjoyed this video. Go ahead and shoot a like and subscribe. Definitely look forward to seeing some other videos coming up, other reviews, other builds, motherboards, tablets, and who knows what else I'm going to be going ahead and throwing in there. If you have any questions regarding this build over here, or any process regarding the motherboard, any features, go ahead and let me know. Leave a comment, and I'll go see how I can best help you here. Thanks again for watching, everyone, and as always, stay safe. Take care. Good night.